Welcome back to Electron Stance. Today I want to tell the story of an apparent switch failure that took me on a wild ride. This switch just came out of my 2009 Kia Rio. Its purpose is to turn on the brake lights when the pedal is pressed. The switch contacts used here are normally closed. When the pedal is all the way up, it pushes this plastic actuator in and opens the switch, interrupting current to the brake lights. I removed it because I thought it had gone bad, and I'll share the whole sad story in a moment. But for now, I'll just say I was wrong. The switch is still functioning correctly, as you can see. So here's the story from the top. While I was out of town on a recent trip, I loaned this car to a friend. Someone pointed out that the brake lights stayed on when the car was parked with the ignition off. Their temporary solution was quite effective. They unplugged the switch while the car was parked and plugged it back in while driving. This kept the brake lights from draining the battery, but left them lit steadily on the road. Hearing about this, I jumped to the conclusion that the switch must have failed electrically, always in the on or shorted state. So before getting the car back, I ordered a replacement part, hoping to fix the car soon after returning home. Unfortunately, I did have to drive the car before the part came. This is where the story takes a crazy detour, and this one is all on me. Instead of plugging in the connector while driving, I decided to just leave it dangling under the dash and use old-fashioned hand signals on the road. Seemed like a good idea at the time. Yeah. During an errand in the car, there was a strange coincidence. The steering effectively locked up in traffic. I could only wiggle it a few degrees back and forth. I let the engine idle and slowly coasted into a parking lot. By the time I got the car stopped in a safe place, the steering was freed up again. Weird. So I drove it home warily to check out later. Meanwhile, fix the problem you know, right? Eventually the new switch came. I crawled under the dash and removed the old switch. A quick check with an ohm meter showed the switch still worked. What the heck? Maybe it was just out of adjustment, but there was no sign of anything having moved in the last 250,000 miles. Oh well, I'll just put the new switch in and adjust it, right? That's when I made a couple of discoveries. First, the connector had gotten mangled somehow, after I unplugged it. More on that later. Second, the tip of the switch's actuator fits neatly into a hole in the metal tab on the brake lever that should push it in when the brake is released. What the heck? Is something supposed to fit in that hole? Okay, let's go to the internet and dig up a parts diagram. Yep, there's supposed to be a plastic bumper pressed into that hole. So it turns out the actual failure occurred when that plastic bumper disintegrated. With a little research, I could have saved myself a lot of trouble and fixed the problem by replacing a $1 plastic part. So what's the design issue here? That switch certainly held up fine after all, but the metal tab could have actuated the switch directly, even without changing the position of the tab, even without using a different switch. Just eliminate the stupid hole. There's plenty of room for adjustment on the switch body. Maybe there was a concern about wear, but the travel of the metal tab is almost perfectly in line with that of the switch's actuator, so wear would be minimal. Pretend this is the tab. There's an old axiom that the most reliable component is the one that isn't there, and that certainly seems to apply here. So here I am again, bitching about a bad design decision that was probably made nearly 20 years ago. What's the point? Well, obviously it gives me something to talk about, and maybe, just maybe, one of you will avoid a similar error in the future. A Pelican Hope candy. Now back to that connector. How did it get mangled? Let's take another look at the area under the dash where I left it hanging. Now look at that exposed U-joint on the intermediate steering shaft. Obviously the connector found its way in there while I was driving and temporarily jammed the shaft. That was a very dangerous situation created by my carelessness. Maybe you can learn from my mistakes. That's what you tune in for, right? That's all for now. Thanks for watching.